gentil, Alouette.
Ah, j'ai du son là. You got sound? On note. Il faut couper celui-là. Voilà, là c'est bon. Is it okay? You receive it? Yes? Wow. Okay. So I will not have to maybe switch, you know? Because they can see, yeah.
Do you feel like that's going to be big enough for signing presenters? Signing presenters, is that close enough?
Is it close enough right here? That frame? Yes, for presenters who are signing? Or do you think the image will be too small? Can we zoom it in?
In first part, you have a presentation with the same sheet like you, Macintosh. And after I have to remove the lectern and the speak standing on the armchairs.
Can we zoom in after we move the lectern?
I will.
Okay.
I don't know. Yes. From 8:30 to 9 is PowerPoint, and after I change. I remove the lectern and I speak. I do what I want. Yeah. Okay. I do what I want. It's OBS here, like you know. You do what you want with OBS. After I can change, I can have several sources and make a mix. That's it, finished. You know, this is Paris, not Amsterdam. Be very careful tonight where you go. Some people in the streets want to sell you something very weird, you know?
Don't eat it or smoke it.
Okay. Change battery. Interpreters. Yeah, I don't know. Yes, it's better with black. Ah, oui. Ok, et il manque un truc.
Oh, good. They've sorted out the video. Good. Patrick, is that what people will see on the live stream? We need to see 2 chairs.
Liisa Kauppinen, qui est venue de Finlande hier soir, et qui, en principe, va faire une conférence ce matin à 8h30. Et on arrivera à la joindre par texte. Elle est sourde. Et oui, elle est présidente de la Fédération mondiale des sourds. Et en principe, elle allait venir hier soir. On n'arrive pas à le joindre. Est-ce qu'elle sait déjà à l'hôtel? Le nom de famille, c'est Kauppinen. Ça commence avec K-A-U. Ah oui, elle est là. D'accord, ok. De toute façon, au moins, elle est partie. Donc, d'accord, merci beaucoup. Au revoir. She's at the hotel. She has a room, and she's there. She arrived, so we don't know. How she's getting there.
These were on the chairs.
I know.
Yeah. Sweet. I didn't know if.
Good morning. Oh, that's loud. I hope you all enjoyed yourselves last night, especially the entertainment from our delegates from Nepal, South Africa, Fiji, and South Korea, and Hong Kong. Thank you so much for performing and sharing your culture with us last night. So yesterday we announced that WASLI UK had raised £6,000 for the Emerging Countries Bursary, and that involves 6 delegates cycling from London to Paris. And good news is they arrived safely, and we have a video to prove it. Your fundraising and athletic efforts really embody the spirit of WASLI. Thank you so much for raising the money you did. And if you're here, can you stand up so we can applaud you? So now just a bit of housekeeping before we start the day's proceedings. A few of you have asked about water. There are actually water fountains around the building, so if you have your own bottle, that's really handy. And just ask a volunteer where the water fountains are. And please wear your lanyards at all times, because security are actually going to be removing people who do not wear their lanyards or do not have lanyards. During breaks, there's going to be 2 buffet tables. So there was one last night, so there'll be one on the other side of the venue. So when you go to have your meals, if you could just form lines, there's plenty of food for everyone, don't worry about that. All keynote presentations will be in this room, and stream 1 is in this room, and there will be signs on the door, so you will know what presentations are coming up. Stream 2 will be held in Polanovsky, which is on level 2. So when you're in the grand hall, you turn left and then a right, and then there's a staircase or a lift. It's in the same theatre that the WASLI GM was in yesterday, but there will be volunteers to direct you. Please turn your phones to silent if you could, but not off, because we want you to be posting and tweeting and using the hashtag WASLI Paris 2019. And if you are accessing the Spanish or French interpretation, when you leave a room, if you could leave your receivers by the door where you collected them, that would be great, because they will not work in another room if you decide to take them. So the vision you see behind me is currently being live streamed across the world thanks to RID. And we'd like to thank RID for making it accessible to all of the members who couldn't be with us here in person. I don't know how many people are linked in and watching from home, but welcome and thank you for joining us. So before we start with the keynote, Deborah Russell would like to say a few words.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm sure you'll all agree that we had a very exciting start to the conference, but some of you might not have been at the opening ceremony. So I'd like to ask a question. Who is here at a WASLI conference for their very first time? Hands up, everyone. Congratulations. Thank you for coming. Welcome. Welcome to you all. My second question. Who's here at WASLI for the second time? Were you in Spain? In Segovia? Okay, some people were in Segovia. How many of you came to Durban in South Africa? Quite a few. Istanbul in Turkey, how many of you were there? Good to see so many of you here back again. So whether you're here for the first time or you've been to WASLI conferences several times, I'd like to welcome you all here today. I hope you'll all maximise the opportunity to network and get to know each other. Yesterday, people asked what gift I received as the departing president, and this lovely scarf is the gift that I received. So I'd like to thank you all so much, and to the board in particular, for choosing this gift for me. I thought it would be a box of chocolates. I love chocolate personally, but it wasn't chocolate. Instead, I was given this beautiful scarf, so thank you. During the opening ceremony, we acknowledged various representatives from different associations who are here with us at this conference. And today I'd like to actually welcome to the stage Alexandra Janser, who's here to represent FIT, the Federation for Interpreters and Translators internationally. So please, if you'd like to say a few words.
Messieurs, Dames les Présidentes, chers collègues, je suis très honorée d'être ici à Paris avec vous pour commencer votre congrès mondial. Malheureusement, c'est tout ce que je peux dire en français. Et my sign language is restricted to my profession. Let me convey to you the best wishes and greetings of our present FIT president, FIT being the International Federation of Translators. He has been a long-term promoter of cooperation between our international associations, between WASLI and FIT. And the climax of all this was probably the signing of the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, in 2017 in Brisbane. at our last World Conference. I'm honored to have been asked to greet you on behalf of the FIT Council, of which I'm a member, and the FIT Executive Committee. And for the past 2 years or so, I have been a FIT liaison with WASLI. Thank you. I've killed it already. And in this capacity, I have cooperated with Deborah Russell, and I thank her very much for this wonderful cooperation. I have already been in touch with your new president, Christopher Stone. And believe it or not, spoken language interpreting and sign language interpreters have much more in common that one might think of at first sight. I do not really have the time to go into all the detail here. Therefore, let me just say, when I had a look at your program, it proved once again that the topics you are going to hear about are very, very similar to topics you may hear at spoken language interpreter conferences. So again, this proves that it is all fairly similar, in particular, I think, in the fields of community interpreting and legal interpreting. And another very important topic, I think, is academic training and a good curriculum for training interpreters, be it sign language or spoken language. Now, I'm looking forward to listening to as many presentations as possible. And if you're interested in the work that FIT does, please get in touch with me anytime you see me around the venue, and I'll be around most of the time. And I will be delighted to hear about your work and also about the problems that your associations are facing, because again, they are probably similar to the problems spoken language interpreters associations are facing. I am convinced, and we all at FIT are, that by working together, by joining forces, we can do much more for interpreters around the globe and across all languages. And only by doing so, we will be successful. And in this spirit, I would also like to invite WASLI member associations to also become FIT members. Some of them already are, very few, but we hope to see more in the future. And as they say in French, c'est ensemble que nous sommes forts. And in this spirit, let me wish you all a most fruitful and interesting event, and thank you very much for having the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Before I ask Liz Scott-Gibson onto the stage to introduce our keynotes, I'd just like to acknowledge, first of all of the interpreters that are working here today in this session and throughout the conference. And I'd also like to acknowledge the support from AFILS, the French Sign Language Interpreters Association, and currently the Vice President, Rachel, is working in the LSF team. So thank you to you and your association for all of your work. So now it's time for Liz Scott-Gibson to introduce our keynote speakers. Thank you, Liz.
Hello, everybody. I hope you're well rested, and now the microphone's working, you're awake. The conference theme is honouring the past, treasuring the present, and shaping the future. So it's my responsibility to introduce our two keynote speakers. And it is a real honour for us to honour our past with these two speakers. Our first keynote, if you read the bio, is just incredibly impressive. We see words like the person's amazing, inspirational, passionate. And the person who I'm talking about is Liisa Kauppinen. So who is this inspiring person? I first met her when some of you may have not yet been born. In 1987, at the World Congress in Finland. That was when she had been appointed to be the General Secretary of the WFD. She worked tirelessly, and even though she had retired from the WFD, her passion has made sure that she's maintained her involvement, and as we can see, she's with us here today. The second keynote is an interpreter, Bill Moody. I first saw Bill that same year, vintage year, 1987. And he was amazing too. I was terrified. I thought, wow, he can do international sign like that? It was terrifying for me. You know that often people who are famous or experts, they're often warm and supportive, and that was instilled in Bill. I think Bill has worked over 50 years in the profession, which is an achievement in and of itself. And he has connections here in France, Paris. He worked here before, I think in 1977 to 1984. So he's half American and half French. I'm sure there's Parisian blood in those veins. I have two dear memories of wonderful achievements that our colleagues have made, out of a list which is phenomenally long. Of course, we can thank Liisa because at the UN, in the discussions surrounding the CRPD, if we look at the articles, there's clear recognition of sign language, but also the mention that you have to have professional sign language interpreters. When the first draft was written, it didn't mention professional. It just said sign language interpreters. And Liisa fought in those meetings to make sure that the word professional was included. And that inclusion helps us. So we owe a large debt of gratitude to Liisa for achieving that, to make sure that we can improve and require professional interpreting services. And the memory I have of Bill with his tireless work is ensuring that deaf interpreters have been brought into our profession, especially when we look at New York and the UN. Bill has single-handedly supported the development of that in our profession to make sure our deaf colleagues work on a par with us. Liisa was given the Human Rights Award by the UN in 2013. That was just an amazing award for a phenomenal special person. I know Bill has also been given many awards over the years. But I think in his heart he values one award especially, when he was given a certificate of appreciation, certificate of merit by the WFD, which just shows that both of these people are amazing and have been rightly recognized as such. Hopefully you'll give them both a warm welcome to the stage.
Hello, everybody.
Hello,
hello,
everybody.
hello. How inspirational it is to see so many people, so many interpreters in the room. Before, there were so few of us when we started out. Now look at everyone. Let's sit down. Well.
So where do we start? We thought we'd just have a bit of a chat to you as an audience, and hopefully it'll be a good way to go.
Good start. That would be great. Thank you.
So the theme is honouring the past.
Yes, that's right, Bill.
Does that mean we're old?
Yes, I think we're old. I'm old. I'm 80 years old.
And still fit.
And I first began teaching sign language interpreters in 1960. So you've been involved 50 years, I've been involved 60 years with sign language interpreters. I beat you.
You're my senior.
And Bill and I met a very long time ago, and we've met many times in New York, and we're always having a dialogue about honouring our past and the shaping of the future and what we see happening. And so we thought this would be an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about things that we would like to say, things that we would like to share. So I think, Bill, over to you first.
So I suppose for me, the first thing to say is, as Liz Scott-Gibson has said, we did meet in 1987 in Finland, the World Congress of the WFD. That was the first time that the Congress had provided international sign interpreters professionally, who paid. And I was being involved in the WFD, you could really see that changes were afoot. In 1951, the WFD was established. In 1987, at the Espoo conference in Finland, that's when we started to have an executive board that was deaf. The board plus the general secretary and the president. And it was Liisa and Jörka Andersson, who's Swedish, who had moved to America. He taught at Gallaudet for many years. The two of them were just inspirational to see these deaf leaders on a global stage inspire people. That really helped the WFD to change rapidly. Up until that time, there had been many hearing people making presentations, but this was a real game changer. So it's thanks to Liisa and Jörka, who sadly is no longer with us, that we've seen such phenomenal strides. So I would like to honour the past in remembering you two and the significant contributions you made. Of course, Liisa is, Liisa is famous, Jörka is well known too. Also Markku Yochanan. But I think they've been the figureheads. But I have other people who I look up to as well, in different areas of the world. You will have people in your communities. I have people in my community who were coders, who grew up with deaf parents, who were inspirational. When I went to church, my family would go to the congregation, sit in a row, and in the next pews, there were deaf people. I saw them as I was growing up. There was one person who was interpreting there, a woman. She must have been around 50, 55 at the time. And I think I was around the age of 14, 15, no, I was 14, yes, that's it. I was 14. And I remember looking at her whilst I sat in the congregation, and I felt, wow, I could see the connection she had with the deaf congregants. And I thought, I want to learn that. So I asked her if she would teach me. And my parents were very supportive of me learning sign language. So my family came with me and we learned some signs. And she was interpreting at the church, and that was one of the ways I learned. And she gave me a little bit more responsibility as I got to be more and more fluent in the language. And I grew up in America, so just in that part. Texas, for those of you who know that. Gun country. And so this woman, who was an interpreter in our community, all of the deaf people would ask her if she would interpret for them. And it was really clear that she interpreted day and night to support her community. But that was a significant responsibility that she had as a coder. And just if we're honouring the past, I would really like to remember her. Her name is Lillian Beard. She was involved in RID's establishment. She was on the first board of the American Association, and I would like to pay homage to her. And I know that all of you in the audience will have someone like Lillian in your community, your Lillian somewhere. All of you will know someone. So if we're honouring the past, we should remember those people. So in terms of the WFD, of course, I pay homage to Liisa, Jyrka, Liz, Markku, Yochanan, but we also must respect to those people from our communities who are inspirational too.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for those beautiful words, and to you, Liz, too, for your wonderful introduction. As we've said, we met in 1987, but technically Bill and I actually met before that in Stockholm in Sweden as part of a theatre production. And then we met once more in 1987.
That's right, I'd forgotten that.
Do you remember? Actually, that's when we first met. Bill was very heavily involved in the theatre and was always very dramatically dressed and always looked so beautiful. But I didn't really realise that he was a sign language interpreter until I met him in 1987 in that capacity. And I could see that he was one of the top international sign interpreters of the time. And over time, I would meet you, I'd meet Liz, I'd meet you, I'd meet Liz. I would work with both of you. And more recently, my visits to the UN in New York, I'd see so many excellent, outstanding sign language interpreters working, and I think it's with big thanks to you and others, Jyrka would be proud to see the developments that we have achieved and where we've got to at this point in time. When I worked as the General Secretary for the WFD, I met many people and would talk about the work of the WFD and would share information. And people would say to me, Liisa, I don't think you should be going to the UN to represent the issues because it's not an effective forum for us. You won't achieve anything by spending time there, all of these long, arduous, boring meetings. So I went with the hearing General Secretary, and we worked together. And all of these hearing people were chatting and talking, and we would pay attention, And the deaf people would be asking what's going on, and previously hearing General Secretary was saying, oh, this is boring, you don't need to know what's being said, there's no need for you to know, and this would go on. We would ask again, we would ask again. And there'd be all of these conversations going on around us. And this hearing General Secretary, even though there's animated conversations happening, would not tell us what was going on. And we would see people falling asleep around the room. And I thought that this can't be the way. We need to make sure that we can work with the UN. So I went to the Scandinavian Interpreting Services, and we got professional sign language interpreters to accompany us to those meetings, which made all of the difference to us. And I think the most important change for us in achieving things for the deaf community has been working with sign language interpreters to access these kinds of fora and having international sign on an international stage. And I became involved in Finland in training sign language interpreters, and really, at the beginning, we didn't really know what we were doing. There were many missioners involved in helping deaf people at those points, often men, perceiving deaf people as experiencing problems and barriers and helping these poor deaf people. And through the church, people would be recruited. We would recruit nuns and other females to, again, help these poor deaf people, and who would then begin to mediate between deaf people and other hearing people. And there was one missioner who I had taught to sign. And who was asking me how to sign about different medical concepts if they were interpreting in the doctors. So we began to teach them how to sign about various medications, and we taught the nuns, we taught the missioners. And we saw more and more people taking interest, and we opened our doors to more people to learn sign language. We had conversations with the government to try and recruit more people, to set up short courses where we taught coders, for example. We had so much fun, especially with the coders who'd grown up learning sign language, had played in sign language in the deaf clubs and in the deaf communities. They had learnt sign language through their everyday interactions. But there was so much more they still had to learn. And the short courses weren't enough. So we began to look around to other parts of the world about what kind of interpreter training was available. And we finally negotiated funding for a one-year interpreter training program in Finland to be established. And we then had to think about what the curriculum was that we needed.
What year was that?
1978. Thereabouts, I think. Late 1970s. I was working at the Finnish Association of the Deaf at the time, and my responsibility was to teach sign language, and there were various team of teachers that I was responsible for. And we spoke to the interpreters about what kind of curriculum we needed. What do we need to do to train these interpreters? We had to write this down. We had to capture this information. And one phone call I had with the government, they were asking lots of questions about what we needed, and I didn't really understand what they wanted. And over time, we developed our knowledge, we developed our understanding. And Riley Ojala, a hearing sign language interpreter and coder in Finland, then made a follow-up phone call for me and then explained everything and signed to me what she was saying on the phone and this conversation that was going back and forth, back and forth. And I realized all of a sudden that was what access was like. That was true access. I could access this phone call, I could access this governmental information through a sign language interpreter. So we established short courses. This led to a diploma course, to a university program. Initially, people were saying, a university course? We don't need a university program to train sign language interpreters. But over time, we came to realize how important that was, because once all the coders who came through their families were out there working, we needed to train more people. We needed to train people to use sign language. We needed to expand our horizons. So we knew that we couldn't do that without any formal training. So over time, the deaf community and others accepted that we needed formal training programs to a high level. So Riley was instrumental in helping us to understand that we needed this whole process. And now look at how much has changed.
And she is another person whose past we must honour if we're honouring our past. Riley always had lovely flowery dresses, flowing dresses.
Lots of colours, she even wore them when she was interpreting.
Very colourful. So we would definitely like to pay homage to her. Riley, I think, was involved in the WFD board. She and I were often involved in the meetings there interpreting, along with Liz Cook-Gibson. I remember Riley and Liz watching International Sign and interpreting into spoken language, and it was just astonishing for me. Riley didn't have English as her first language, but she was able to just produce these wonderful interpretations. And of course, Liz has a voice like a maestro. But it's important that we honour those interpreters who are able to ensure that deaf people were empowered and that their voices were heard. It's really interesting when people were thinking about, we don't need to have university-level training, or you don't need to actively participate in the UN. But actually, we've seen that that's really fundamentally important. If we look at the CRPD, the Human Rights Convention for People with Disability from the UN, really it's thanks to the President of Mexico and many other people and the discussions that you had.
And many other of our disabled colleagues and allies who supported our fight for sign language recognition.
So empowering people, empowering our communities is fundamentally important.
Harking back to our first experience together in 1987, over time we flew around the world, and I was able to visit 90 different countries throughout the world over time. And I saw so many interpreters, but when we first started out, there were hardly any professional sign language interpreters. So I'd have to meet government representatives. And obviously I couldn't access the national spoken or sign languages of those countries. They didn't necessarily use English. I might have a sign language interpreter with me. So we would bring a local sign language interpreter. For example, Selman Hoti from Kosovo came and worked with me as one example in Kosovo to meet with governmental representatives. There was a minister that we met and a minister's representative for human rights. And I wanted to have an in-depth dialogue with this minister. And Selman, who's Kosovar himself, was speaking in Albanian, chatting away, if you like, while I signed. Had no idea what he said, but he seemed to be interpreting what I was saying. And he's just one example of many, many sign language interpreters that I've had the experience of working with, and the phenomenal work that they do to support deaf people. And I see them then becoming more involved, using international sign, supporting us as deaf people to be able to negotiate on this international level. And we bring into the fold deaf people from those countries, hearing interpreters from those countries, working in international sign, working from international sign into English or into their local language. And we see many deaf associations protesting that they don't have the funding that they need. For example, in Thailand, and I would have negotiations with the Thai government about why they weren't supporting their local national association. And I was saying, you have an obligation under the CRPD to report back and explain what you're doing for deaf people in your country. And they had no awareness of what they were supposed to be doing. And the National Association had no idea. So I tried to empower them with this information so that they could lobby their government for what they needed. And then this also meant including professional sign language interpretation. And there were many countries that I visited over several occasions, for example, Japan, where we had Osaka, who would work in Japanese Sign Language, and we'd have international sign interpreters working between Japanese Sign Language, International Sign, English, and it was a wonderful experience for me over many, many occasions. But this is an example of deaf and hearing people working together in partnership. And there has been a lobby to say that we shouldn't recognise international sign. But throughout the world, I think we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we've achieved without working with international sign interpreters. But we do need to value national sign languages. That's of the utmost importance for us and the work of the WFD. So, for example, with the UN CRPD and the Convention's mention of various governments' responsibilities who've signed up to the Convention, there are 150 countries altogether who have agreed to take responsibility to follow the Convention and report back on how they are fostering the work of professional sign language interpreters in those countries to support and provide services that are accessible for deaf people in sign language. And we have a responsibility to educate national deaf associations on how they can do that work.
I do remember at the UN in the discussions of the CRPD, at the time we weren't sure whether that was important, and I remember some people from America were saying, well, we have ADA, so we don't necessarily need that in our domestic law. But after it was agreed and ratified, to see the impact it's had globally has been phenomenal. And the fact that we had professional sign language interpreters added to that declaration was just amazing for us, the convention. So now we see so many signatories, and they have a duty to follow that. They need that requirement. And of course, we have people who are saying international sign isn't a language or whatever, and international's not necessarily as complete as it could be. I mean, I think it's fair to say it's true, it's not a language. But we can see at the WFD and the strength that it's had in WASLI, for example. It really is thanks to communication and using international sign that we've started to see these changes occur.
I agree with what you just said, Bill, and I think when we look at what happens at the UN, when people come together, and we've lobbied for having the inclusion of the term professional sign language interpreters, and through my experience in those meetings, many people objected to us requesting the need for professional sign language interpreters. But we responded by saying, well, would you accept not having professional spoken language interpreters working at these meetings? So we gave them food for thought about us having the rights to have the equivalent experience that they were having through spoken language interpreters. And there was one particular country representative who talked about seeing children that had deaf parents signing and interpreting, and then many other country representatives acknowledged that they had seen the same, and more this ripple effect went through the room. And people started to acknowledge that, yes, sign language interpreting was important. But at that point, it gave me the opportunity to say, children, it's not appropriate that children should be interpreting for their parents. Would you accept the same of your children interpreting for you? And the UN has a convention on the rights of the protection of children. So we had to use that also to lobby for the need for professional sign language interpreters. We also lobbied for the recognition of different national sign languages, because although people thought, well, there's one Braille system, there should be one sign language system, but we had to convince them that there are many, many sign languages as there are spoken languages, and that it isn't possible just to have one international sign system for deaf people throughout the world, and this needed to be acknowledged in the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And so it was a lot of work that we did at those UN meetings over a 5-year period to convince people of our needs as a worldwide deaf community. So now when I reflect on what we see, I'm astounded to see how much we've achieved over time, and I think the future looks good. As Bill and I had many conversations when we worked together in New York, and we recognised the many challenges that we faced, the barriers that we faced, the arguments that we've had around technological advancements, the threat of cochlear implants, so many things that we've had to encounter and challenge. And we've had to lobby on an individual level, on a systemic level. And we've talked about this many, many times about our experiences and how much has changed over time. But I think that the future is bright. We see more recognition of sign language. And our Brazilian colleagues will be talking about shaping the future in their keynote tomorrow. And we know that there's so many more things to be achieved. Technology has actually enhanced what we're able to do with sign languages. So there are many positive things to look forward to.
So you know we're here at WASLI, and we have over 500 conference delegates.
506, get it right, 506.
I told you she was my senior, my better.
The French interpreter over there told me exactly how many there were.
Perfect. See, she arrived close to the time that we were supposed to be starting, and there was some conversations, and she was clearly gathering information to make sure she was ready to hit the road.
But it's always been so easy to work with Bill. I have many, many fond memories of our work together, going to Africa, and I've learnt so much from him. I visited many African countries and saw how much influence there was from American Sign Language, and people talking about the fact that there were these African sign languages which were influenced by ASL, but we had to respect those local sign languages in the same way that we respect Finnish Sign Language, Dutch Sign Language, or the other various national sign languages throughout the world. And we know that also one country could have several sign languages. So I learned from conversations with Bill that these African countries really had African American signed languages because they'd evolved over time. But it was important for us to acknowledge the local indigenous sign languages. And it's important for us now to recognise how far we've come in having various national sign languages recognised throughout the world. So it is important for international sign to be used for communication. It does assist us with our communication, and I know it's widely used by young people these days. I don't think international sign will ever die out, but our national sign languages need to be preserved.
Yes, I remember when we went to our first seminar in Africa, and we were focusing on sign languages, and it was in the Congo. And
it's a French-speaking country, right?
yes. And so we had some deaf people there signing, and I was like, oh, it looks like American Sign Language. And also they had French mouthings, which for me was peculiar. I was like, wow, thank goodness I'd gone to France and learned French. Otherwise, I may be in trouble here. But it was definitely a little bit of a change of my mindset. And then in discussions, it worked very well. But yes, we have to respect the languages that are used locally. And of course, national sign languages need to be given due respect. For children, for their education, we need to make sure children have access to their national languages. But I think international sign, it's morphed and changed over the years. Some of the changes are phenomenal. I remember in 1987 in Finland, when the first group of interpreters who were providing professional services at the WFD, I would say that you probably couldn't deliver 100% of the information. There was quite a lot of moving around and gesturing. It was quite an energetic form of IS at the time. Maybe you got 50 to 60% of the information across to your audience. But now we see international sign used by different generations, and it's changed. maybe even people are able to do 80 or 90% of the information delivered in IS. Who knows what the future will hold, 100% potentially. Maybe, Nigel, you've got the 100% mark already. But I think we've seen that change significantly.
When did we go to the Congo? Do you remember what year that was?
Oh, my age fails me, I can't recall.
But I remember visiting a deaf school and the fact that they were using French mouthing but with ASL signs. And they were signing Wednesday. And what's the word in French? It's mercredi?
Mercredi.
So they were saying mercredi on their mouth, but signing Wednesday with a W handshake from ASL, which was something very odd to see. And they were using pictures to show the different signs like mother and father, and they were going through picture by picture and asking the children to convey what the signs were. And they were some of these children were actually using local signs, and they were being corrected and introduced to the American signs. And so we could see that the national sign language, although it was evident, wasn't being acknowledged by the teachers in that school and actually was being oppressed. The students weren't being allowed to use those national signs.
I think maybe that was in 1992, 93, something like that.
Oh, good. Thanks for your memory.
How are we doing for time? Oh, we can take our time, apparently. Oh, we have plenty of time. 15 minutes to go.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. I'd like to fast forward a little bit through some of our experiences of working together. And there was one particular time, when was it? Let me think. Oh, yes, I remember. When I first began to really acknowledge the importance of the work of sign language interpreters to the work of deaf people, the work of Finnish, of Swedish, of ASL and international sign interpreters. And I would move quite happily, luckily, between working with interpreters with all of these sign languages. And I think if it wasn't for the work I've been able to do with these professional interpreters, I wouldn't be here now. And I received a Human Rights Award, but I wouldn't have been able to achieve that award without working closely with professional sign language interpreters. You have all been such an integral part of my life, my working life, and I would like to acknowledge that in front of you all. I can't forget the work that you have all done to support me. And Bill, you are one of them. You're one of my treasured interpreters that I have worked with over all this time.
Well, I think, I would feel the same, growing up and learning sign language from deaf people, that richness and that exchange that I got. Really, it's been inspirational learning the language, being opened to a whole new way of being. Actually being able to observe the energy that you have, Liisa, and the fact that you refuse to accept any barriers and break through all of those glass ceilings. Your heart is for the deaf community. I would say deaf people have given all of us interpreters a lot. That's a treasured gift. Thank you.
I think one of the tips I would like to share with this audience is as a result of my experience and people asking me how I've managed to open doors and how I've managed to negotiate my way through various things. And when I teach young people, I always say to them, it's important not to be closed off to experiences, be open to new experiences, listen to others, listen to people's problems, try and empathize with them, put yourself in their shoes and work with them constructively as to how to solve problems. Don't just complain about them, work towards solutions. For Article 2 of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, the Chinese delegation were arguing about what the definition of language was and whether signed languages should be recognised. And in the end, we reached a conclusion that spoken and sign languages should be included, but the Chinese delegation kept insisting that the words sign languages were removed, which was really hair-raising for me. And so in the end, I approached one of the Chinese government delegation and asked him why he wanted to have this removed. And he said, well, sign language is not a real language, is it? And I challenged him about his thinking about that. And he said, oh, well, yes, it's a real language. And I said, well, why do you want to have it removed then? And he was saying it's because in the parliament in China, they actually have 20 different regional dialects, regional languages used throughout China. And so he was also concerned that they would also have to have 20 different sign language interpreters present working in the parliament. But then I said, well, how many deaf people are there in the Chinese parliament? And he said, well, none. I said, well, why would you need to have 20 different sign language interpreters then? You might have one deaf person, they might need a couple of sign language interpreters working with them, and you pick whichever dialect that they use, whichever regional language that they use. And once I explained that, he went back to his government, back to Beijing, relayed that information, came back to the UN and said, I have spoken with my governmental representatives and they now accept that we can include sign language. So I said, thank you very much. And we went into the meeting and I proposed yet again that we should keep sign language and that the Chinese government would support this recommendation and that we would have both spoken and sign languages. And all of the other governmental delegates congratulated us that we'd all learnt together through this process to make this achievement. Another delegation from Russia also wanted to have sign language removed from one particular article. I can't remember which one it was. I think it was about information and communication and respect and promotion of the use of sign language. And the Russian delegate argued for this to be removed from the article. And again, I argued for the importance to retain this in the convention. So I actually made a request to meet the Russian delegation. And with the Chinese delegation, I'd actually only had interactions with one person, but I actually had to meet a large group of Russian delegates. And so I made sure that Markku Yochanan was with me, so the two of us could go in together, and we had to explain that if you did not have recognition of national sign language, how problematic that could be. And they expressed concerns because of the variation that they would see throughout the former USSR and the various sign languages that were used. And they could not accept the fact that sign languages should be recognised. And we corrected them on some of their misunderstandings about what sign languages are and the fact that we should respect the use of local, national sign languages, promote the use of sign languages. And the Russian translation actually had been incorrect and talked about one national sign language, which we weren't actually advocating for. We were talking about the recognition of different sign languages rather than enforcing one standardized sign language throughout Russia. And then once we had these conversations and we realized there'd been a misunderstanding, again, we agreed. The Russian delegation came in and said, my friends, the WFD and I have come to an agreement and we would like to retain the reference to recognition, promotion and respect for national sign languages. And it was a massive achievement for us.
And the way you make those achievements is by making personal connections, and that's definitely your strength.
But I think it's important to listen. I didn't want to go in there and wag my finger at them and tell them off. I had to listen to their point of view, understand where they were coming from, what their perspective was, in order to meet them halfway and explain what our perspective was. And without necessarily saying, you're wrong, but trying to give them some insight into where we were coming from by understanding where they were coming from. And this really opened the doors for us to achieve what we needed to achieve.
Yeah, it's through discussion that you achieve your goals. Another thing that I see is deaf people today. We see the opportunities changing. Deaf people are able to go to university, very much have higher professional jobs than they may have been able to do. When I started as an interpreter, you'd provide access to maybe school, not school, or kind of vocational training, or a hospital, or a variety of different community settings, and you'd do everything. People would call me, and I'd go to these appointments, whatever they may be. Now I start to see deaf people having higher professional goals, becoming chief executive officers of companies or whatever, and suddenly there are different expectations about how you provide interpreting in those services, in those areas. There's specialized vocabulary in those domains. There's technical terminology. So in the past, when we used to try and do everything, and now we're starting to see much greater specialism. So I think in the future, interpreters will have to think about learning specific areas rather than trying to be a one-stop shop, one person who can do everything.
I think that's a good point that you make, Bill. And I would like to thank all the governments that have recognised national sign languages so far and have given support for professional sign language interpreters, which have enabled deaf people to make these achievements, to advance their own careers through studying science, medicine, and a whole range of different topics, law and so on and so forth, and working with professional sign language interpreters so that those interpreters understand that terminology and understand the specialised topics that they're studying. And I think this is a future challenge because we will see more and more deaf people advancing in these careers, advancing in their special areas of knowledge, and the interpreters need to come along for the ride with them.
Yes. I remember Nigel Howard came to New York, well, some time ago, and was doing some training. We had a workshop focusing on interpreting within medical settings, so hospitals and doctors. And I was really amazed. I would say that we have had interpreters who have, for many years, if they hear specialised vocabulary, they might just fingerspell something. They don't necessarily know that this is a specific piece of anatomy, where it is in the heart. And Nigel was saying, really, if you're wanting to be a specialist in this area, you need to know what these things look like so you can represent them to deaf people well, show them, depict them. And I remember thinking, wow, I've experienced doctors using terminology that I didn't understand. But it's our job to understand that terminology, and if we don't, to ask for them to explain it, so that you know the picture that you can draw upon to deliver a more effective interpretation. That's just one example of the kind of specialism that's now required of us.
You're right, Bill, and I have a memory of one deaf person in Finland who went through a university program and actually studied dance. And as part of the whole program of study, they had to learn about physiology and the way that the body worked and all the different components in the body, the different ligatures and ligaments and various things. And the interpreter fingerspelled all of these terms. And the deaf student in question would talk to me about how challenging that was. And so I would meet with these interpreters that was interpreting for this program, and we would go through the textbook for the course, and I would show them how to sign these different concepts. And over time, this deaf student achieved so much because the interpreters worked with them to convey these concepts visually, which, as you say, Bill, is so important.
And I think that's the point. Interpreters and deaf people have to work hand in hand. We have to work together.
You're right. And when I look back over time, and my work for the last 60 years and yours for the last 50 years, I am 10 years ahead of you, but we have a very comparable experience. And I think when I used to be the chief executive of the Finnish Association of the Deaf, and I was general secretary for the WFD, and working with sign language interpreters for many, many hours on a weekly, monthly basis. And I remember there was 120 hours a year of interpreting services that I could access. But I know in 1 year I accessed over 1,800 hours of interpreting, and it was impossible for the government to cover all the costs for the interpreting needs that I had. So the Finnish Association of the Deaf also had to cover many, many hours of interpreting provision. And I think it's interesting to see how much progress we have made through people lobbying. You mentioned Yochanan earlier. And the social services in Finland. So it's on a systemic level, on an individual level, professional interpreters, interpreting associations, educators, project workers. There have been so many people that have been involved in improving the quality standards of professional sign language interpreting over time. And it really warms my heart to see so many of you all here today as part of this professional association. And you will make the future of our profession possible and continue to grow and to develop. Thank you.
And I'm delighted to see deaf people thanking interpreters, and I'd like to thank the deaf community and deaf people as well on interpreters' behalf. Thank you, that's the point.
Thank you, Bill.
I mean, wow. They both have so much knowledge. I want to try and scrabble around in their brains and get as much of it as I can. But time is against us, and we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure if you want to know more, you'd be more than welcome to approach them and ask some questions.
I'll be around, I'm not going anywhere.
So on behalf of the conference, I'd like to thank our keynote speakers for an amazing opportunity for them to share their knowledge and experience. And we have a small token of our appreciation. So thank you, Liisa.
Thank you so much. Thank you, that's wonderful.
And Bill, we also have a small token of appreciation for you. Where's my hug, Bill? Where's the hug? He's known me so long, he should know better. I love her.
But I'd like to give one big hug for you all. I'm throwing a hug out to all of you. I love you. Thank you.
And so my last comment would be that you can see the names here, the certificates. I think maybe they need to be changed and we need to give them new names. Wonder Woman. And Superman. Thank you very much. And thank you to our sponsor, CIT.
Morning tea is waiting for you outside, but we only have 15 minutes. We've shortened it, so it's a case of eat and run. But stream 1 after morning tea is here, and stream 2 upstairs in Polonovsky. Enjoy.